A point in a crucial game for the Socceroos seems a solid result on paper, but the performance on the pitch itself indicated that there was probably a win left on the table. Profligate finishing has come back to bite Australia again, as chance after chance went by with little sting or threat. The Saudi goalkeeper took use your head a bit too far, and McGree attempted yet another worldie. Oh, and Saudi had thought they'd won it, by the way, but a single flag raise put an end to that. So is this draw enough for Australia? Will they have to dig extra deep in the rest of this round of qualifying if they want to keep their World Cup hopes alive? That, plus a little bit on the Juan Mata situation, the Women's Asian Cup, and, at Paletti's demand, some Pararoos and Matildas content on this episode of the Roundball Australia podcast. My name is Jacob Stevens. I'm taking over the hosting duties from Lockie again. It's been a while, but he was in the press box for this game. We're recording it on the Thursday night just after the game, so he's not available for it. Bad luck for him. You guys get to listen to me a bit more, which I'm sure you all love. But I'm also joined by two fantastic guests tonight. We've got Will here and Christian. Now, boys, I'm not going to go through and do it one by one intro questions, because the only intro question is a draw. Is this result good enough for the Socceroos at this point?
Look, out of the two games that we've got in this break, I think a draw in this game is not the end of the world as long as you're picking up 3 points in the other one. So for me, a draw is, and especially since we saw what we saw at the end, I think I'd take a draw at this point, yeah.
Christian?
I don't think it's good enough, to be honest, at home. You know, you've got to play Saudi Arabia. I believe it's the last game or the second last one in that last window away from home. Like, these are the games you've got to be winning, and we'll touch on it a bit later, but it's just the approach and the way, I guess, Popovic went about it in terms of the football. It's just, I don't want to say it was negative as such, but at the same time, I sort of wanted to see a bit more, just be on the front foot, take the game to them a bit more. Only 2 shots on target for the whole match. I mean, at home, that's just simply not good enough. And, equal on points now with Saudi on 6. Both of those sides have only won 1 game in the first 5. Like, that's just absolutely insane. So it's just absolutely really razor thin tight. And, if you're dropping 2 points at home, chances are obviously it's going to make it much more difficult to get that top 2 automatic spot, with Japan obviously racing ahead. So, for me, I would have loved to have seen a bit more of a positive performance.
Well, that's the thing, right, is that it is so tight, and it does seem like there was sort of perhaps a little bit left out there from this Australia side, where they probably should have gotten something more from this game. They easily had the better of the chances, just couldn't put shots away. Like you said, Christian, and they only had 2 shots on target from 13 total shots. That's just a simply awful conversion rate. You've got to be doing better than that. And it did seem like every time Australia progressed the ball into that final third, it sort of stalled, or they slowed down, or they made the wrong decision. But let's just sort of look at the game more holistically here, because Australia really struggled to break into the game early on. Saudi's high press was fantastic, and especially Joe Gauci was put under a lot of pressure. And I suppose you can sort of talk about this a bit, Will, as a goalkeeper. When you're playing in this system that the Socceroos have, where you only have those real deep outlet options when you're building out from the back as a goalkeeper, we saw the midfield was staying quite high, as was that attacking unit. So he really only had his defensive options there. All that just did, it seemed like it just kept inviting the press. How much of a strain does that put on a goalkeeper mentally, and also on their own performance to constantly be faced with that sort of pressure?
Yeah, just as you said, there's just no outball, and that just builds up and up and up, and you're just on edge constantly. Then every time you receive the ball, you don't want to, which is not the right attitude. You need to go about it properly. So it's really not helpful. Like, you need to have at least an outball that he's hitting pretty consistently. Like, Duke's up there, but it just seemed like it wasn't an option. He's obviously been instructed to build up a certain way, but it just worked, and especially in that first 30 minutes where Socceroos were just under the pump. There really needed to be a kind of plan B there, but it just seemed he stuck to his guns a bit. So he had the 6 dropping in, and finding that ball to him was okay. And then when it was on, the 6 would then play first time around the corner, right?
Yeah.
Most of the time it was a mix of both of them, Irvine and O'Neill, but that's good. We see that so many teams do that now. Trust that ball around the corner first time to either the wider centre back or even the wing back. It can be, and it worked a couple of times. But then when it wasn't on, Saudi were pressing pretty intelligently and cutting off that passing lane.
Yeah.
So the six would just have to bounce straight back to Gauchi, and then he's just in the same position, but a little bit deeper. The Saudi press is even higher. He would then, I saw a couple of times, he'd find a centre back who would then just get pressed by two players, and you'd have to go long anyway. So it just really seemed a bit counterintuitive to me. And it just didn't seem like we adapted it at all. Like Popovic did not adapt to that at all and have any tweaks to that, because he just kept trying the same thing. And the whole point of that and building up deep is to, leave yourself in a better position and maybe stretch the team and you beat one of those pressing lines. But it never seemed like we were able to do that in this game. And really, really struggled and was smothered in that area of the field.
Well, I think one of the things that sort of didn't work in Australia's favour there is, you do mention there that there's always a purpose to playing out from the back and inviting the press like that. And it's because it opens up space in the midfield. But the Saudi midfielders weren't involved in the press as much. It was really only their front line. So that space in behind wasn't available to them. And I suppose, we've always spoken about Popovic as having plan A, plan A, plan A, plan A, and just sticking with it. Christian, do you suppose that this sort of shows that he does need to have a bit more nuance in the way he approaches games, especially when it's clear from the get-go that things aren't going to quite pan out the way that he envisioned?
Yeah, he is definitely a bit stubborn for sure. And we've seen that with his time at the Victory, even as recent as last season, where a bit of the criticism late on in the season was, it's sort of stalling a bit. It's not sort of free-flowing as I guess Popovic would have wanted it. But, you heard a lot of the fans say, where's the plan B? Where's the plan C? If it's not working, then why you keep going with the same thing? I respect, his philosophy and wanting to try and get, his ideas across, because remember, international football, you can sort of have a bit more sympathy with him because he's stressed a lot of times already that he doesn't have as much time, obviously, as he would in terms of club football. This is a new experience for him. So I guess you can understand to a certain degree that he doesn't have the time necessary to try a lot of different stuff with the team. But at the same time, I think there is enough time to surely you produce a plan B, because we have already seen a couple of different formations that Popovic has sort of deployed. So, I mean, you could see instantly the first 30 minutes, you guys touched on the playing out from the back. It just, Gauchi was under so much pressure, and how, I guess, it didn't lead to a Saudi goal, because Gauchi coughed it up a couple of times, even one where I think it went for a goal kick, got completely blocked off. The fullbacks are sort of lost for answers when they got the ball. The passing channels got cut off a lot. So, when you're sort of limited, to, I guess, long balls, but that's the thing, they didn't, alternate for that second option to play a long ball, because Popovic is, thinking or wanted to get his message across to say, just keep playing, I guess, through the Saudi defense, through the midfield, just keep passing the ball around, keep the possession. But you could just see it clearly just wasn't working. And even the midfield was, just struggling to come in, receive the ball, because they're under so much intense pressure from the Saudi press. So, there's just so much things that you need to adjust during, these tight games where, obviously Saudi just brought in a new coach. They're going to have, obviously a new style of playing. So it's going to be tough to obviously adjust early, but those are the signs where, if you're Popovic, you have to say, okay, this isn't obviously looking too good in terms of, trying to advance the ball forward. We need to come up with another solution. And that's obviously, one of the big criticisms of Popovic.
But I suppose the question then is, what is the adjustment that he needs to make, right? It must be tactical, surely, because you look at the squad and at least from what it seems, it's pretty much a full strength side that he was able to field tonight. Goodwin was the only out, obviously, with that suspension. And then you can even argue in some cases that Hrustic might have been a better option in this game, where he is playing a little bit more centrally anyway. You don't have that width, so Goodwin isn't necessarily needed. But it does seem like right now there's none of those injury worries that sort of plagued the end of Arnie's tenure. It's a fit squad. All the best players are there. Something tactically is missing. I'm not quite sure what it is, because there's clear that there's the talent there in the side, right? I mean, you saw glimpses and moments where the team were able to break in behind. I'm thinking to that Brandon Barello chance where instead of taking a shot, he lays the ball off to McGree. that then makes me question if it is a tactical thing or if it is a squad thing and it's a mentality thing, because it's players not making the right decision at the right moment. I'd just be interested to see what your thoughts are on that, guys.
Yeah, I look when you say like, oh, it's a tactical thing. I'd look at, what are you getting out of your players, right? So we've seen him, opt for these 2 10s and play the wing backs. I think you're pretty like damned if you do, damned if you don't with the defense. I think especially we probably have the right wing backs in Miller and Boss there, and this setup gets the best out of them. But then where do you, as we've said it over the previous couple games as well, then there's just really no place for the wingers, which two of our best players probably are wingers.
Yeah.
And I know you want to fit McGree in. He's in really good form. He would make the team. I think you can fit him in as a single 10, and have Aaron Kunda, have Goodwin in the side in positions where, they're favoured and they've played their club career so far, and they've, been demonstrably our better players.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the choice for me that I think he has to make, is he has to really have a look at what's the upside to kind of these different tweaks in the setup, and who are you getting the best out of, and what's going to be best against these teams specifically as well. Like, you can look pretty short-sighted with your setup in just this qualifying phase, I think, alone, right? Look what's going to, you know about the other teams. There's footage of the other teams. We know how they play. Yet you're kind of playing this style that doesn't get the best out of the players that I think are needed most in these games, right? The ones that can take on a game individually. You're trying to get a lot out of players where I think they can just be, muted a lot in games easily, like those 2 10s, McGree and Hrustic. I think Hrustic was really good today. He probably had one of the better games for me in this one, and that was exciting to see. But it was, it was in the early phases as well. It wasn't really in the final phases where he could, nothing really came out of it, right? And I think also, just going specifically in this game, he didn't really link up with Miller that well. Like, so he released Miller out wide, but then just make no other run. There was nobody making the third man run there.
It's just into
Miller,
a dead end every time.
It was just a dead end.
Yeah.
Miller would then just stand up on the ball and have 3 defenders in his way, right? So that was kind of an area where, even though Hrustic was strong in the early phase of the game, of the build up there, he just wasn't as effective in actually making that final chance and making anything happen. He never ran beyond the defensive line in the corner. There wasn't enough like link up in that corner or in those areas, I don't think. Even on the left, when Boss was looking at his most dangerous, it was still just carrying the ball forward by himself. And we saw that in previous games when we had to sit back a little bit, and that was a bit exciting when Boss would go on a run and take on defenders. And you got to have these like intricate plays that release these wing backs down the line to make those cutbacks, but we just never got it there. I cannot remember many phases where we got that ball cut back from the goal line, which is kind of the whole point of playing this way.
Yeah. So is it then, Christian, do you think, a too conservative an approach? I mean, we did see it sort of devolve into that last 20 minutes or so of a lot of that cross and inshallah stuff that, it's come to rue the minds of many Socceroos fans, where it's a lot of getting the ball into sort of that half space, or getting, Geordie Boss on the ball, for instance, and sort of crossing it in from deep rather than pushing up the pitch and getting it to the byline. Is it just a case of, plan A didn't work, break glass in case of emergency is this, we know how to do this, but it's still just, it feels like it's not quite getting enough out of the players? Is it too conservative, or is it just not creative enough? Because you can be creative but conservative. We've spoken about this with Asian sides, right? How they like to control the game but still look for their moment to hit on the counter-attack. But it does seem like Australia, at least, really struggles in finding that balance.
Yeah, you could argue it's definitely a bit more on the conservative side. I mean, you have to look at the stats. We had 42% possession in this game. You mentioned before, Jacob, 13 shots, 2 on target. Like, there were chances there to take more shots. It just, we didn't, I guess, create enough, or we weren't finding the final ball. It was just breaking down way too often, and that just comes down to the player itself, right? Popovic can't really do anything in that situation, right? You just only watch on. But if I were Popovic before the game, I probably wouldn't have went for three centre backs. Just go with the four-man back line, because even Saudi, like, yes, they were threatening on one or two occasions, with the press, but besides that, if you're playing with a five at the back, you're sort of limiting yourself to play that more conservative brand. And with only those two midfielders in there with O'Neill and Irvine, I thought they struggled a bit to not only receive the ball, but once they had the ball, they didn't really have any much options around them, because Australia had quite a few numbers back already. Like I said, because they were a bit too conservative. So, there were glimpses of good signs. I think after the half-hour mark, you saw a bit of a 5 to 10 minute good spell from the Socceroos, where they created a lot of triangles in that final third, in and around the penalty box. You saw Geordie Boss making a lot of good overlapping runs, crosses into the box, and those are the moments where you've got to capitalize. And Popovic has to say, okay, maybe just bring an extra player up forward. And you've got someone like Riley McGree as well, who, yes, he started in that 10 role, but if you're seeing the game, 25, 30 minutes in, where we're struggling at the back to play out, and I guess, just limit the conservatism is my thought, because just play McGree, with the two other central midfielders, that's where the versatility comes in, where, you can change things up a bit. But again, we go back to Popovic not, being, I guess, courageous enough, if you want to call it, to go for a plan B. I think that's his main concern, especially in these sort of crunch matches where he just doesn't want to tweak things too much, or if at all, because he knows that mistakes can come in an instant, and you can't blame him in that sense. But I just want to see a bit more of something, especially in the second half, where you knew that this game was headed for a nil or draw. You could just see it. You could just see the writing was on the wall, and I was just a tad disappointed with, I guess, tactically, just the lack of changes, or thereof changes, to, I guess, go for the 3 points.
Well, it's definitely an interesting discussion, because I mean, that's one of the things of Popovic coming in and playing with that back five and those wing backs, and no real, I guess, established wingers in terms of positionally, and just trying to use those overlapping runs of the wing backs to open space for those 10s to play in. And we've mentioned, obviously, that didn't really open up, and it was perhaps a little bit too cautious today. But is that, again, you mentioned some of that comes down to the players just not making the right decisions or the right choices and things. It does seem a little bit harsh to go fully in on Popovic here when he has made such a big change to things. And obviously it will take time for players to get used to this, because I mean, Craig Goodwin mentioned that he's played in a similar sort of system in Saudi Arabia before, so he's kind of used to it. But a lot of the players, they're playing these traditional 4-3-3 positional sort of styles of football. Coming into this where it's a little bit more jumbled, it can be a bit difficult for them. But Will, you were gonna say something?
Yeah, just to, earlier from what Christian was saying there, I agree. I think, and what I was referring to in the previous part there, I think the wing backs especially were kind of neutralized in this game, right? They were in that first half an hour, especially where Saudi just came out and were on top massively. Like the possession was 75 to 25 at parts, and it was wild. But the wing backs were just being bypassed in their defensive phase. So they were just going past them when Saudi were carrying the ball. They weren't even really doing anything, and then they were just kind of ineffective in attack as well. And that's the point where a coach watches the first half an hour of a game and goes, okay, can I make a change with that? Like, they're actually just not doing anything. I can put Geordie Boss can play left back, maybe bring Miller off. Not to say he had a bad game, but just, there's options.
Yeah.
Put Gary can play right back. Then you've got you've got your versatile across the back line enough to make changes like that in a game, but he just never do it. And we've got, I don't know, quite a bit of versatility across this whole side, but we just never ever see those in-game tactical evolutions. And it's like stuff that's really obvious to fans that have had zero coaching experience in their life and have just watched the game. It's just, it seems a bit disastrous at points where you're kind of shouting at the screen to make these glaringly obvious changes. I don't know. And we all play, we've all played Football Manager and fancy ourselves probably a bit as well, but it doesn't take that much, to want to make these decisions and to see what was
well. That's
going
where the
wrong.
stubbornness comes in, though, doesn't it? Because
Yeah.
it's in a way, it's like Popovic. He knows that there is a possibility that the changes might come off, but at the same time, he doesn't want it to come off because he wants to stick to his same approach. So if he changes and it works, he thinks, okay, well, I'm going to have to stick to this now. Otherwise, the fans are going to be on my back. It's proven that it works. But Popovich is, we know that he's stubborn with his plan A. It can be as simple as that. I know it's crazy to say, but that's how some coaches think, honestly.
It's just so frustrating sometimes when you know that these coaches are such their knowledge is insane, right? But then there's just things that stand out as just really obvious to us, and it's I don't know. At least I'll say one thing. I think the players definitely looked up for this game, which was kind of I think that we lost a little bit under the last games of Arnold. I think that was something that was kind of obviously going. Maybe his time was up, and it had been such a long reign that the players lose that little bit of motivation. Maybe they know they're not playing for their place necessarily. They're one of his favorites. Anything like that you just lose that little bit of fire, that last 10%. But I think they did have it in this game, and after kind of getting shellacked around for the first 30, there was a few moments where Irvine did it. Later in the game where he pressed really high, won the ball back, wasted his chance in the end, right? And so we did make those chances. Hrustic won the ball back. He worked it. Was Hrustic? I know Hrustic had the shot in the end.
Yeah.
It was O'Neill who pressed really high, right?
Yeah.
O'Neill, like they're running for him. They're coming out with this intent, but I don't know. Tonight it was small margins because you can take one of those chances where you're 2-on-1 and 1-on-1, and it's a different story. But it just didn't come off tonight, and I think it makes it look bad overall. But there were moments that you could tell that that at least we were up for it and came out harder in the second half. And we haven't given them much praise at all, but I think we dominated the majority of this game.
Yeah.
In the end.
Well, you mentioned it's a game of small chances, this one, and Saudi Arabia definitely probably felt that the most with that overall goal at the end. Obviously, it just felt like in the moment it was inevitable that, of course, this is the way that Australia is going to lose the game. And then for it to be brought back for offside, all the Saudi players and coaches surrounding the AR on that sideline, berating him, and he stays with his signal, he stays with the offside call, and VAR obviously ends up agreeing with him. And I think, Will, you mentioned in the group chat, perhaps a bit of a trailing leg from the Saudi attacker is what did him in at the end of it. But yeah, it was a game of fine margins, even though the stats don't suggest it, right? Paletti helpfully here just messaged through the XG from the game. Australia had 1.21 XG, Saudi Arabia 0.06. So in the grand scheme of things, Saudi Arabia just did not have enough quality to really challenge Australia. And you mentioned, Will, Australia dominated most of the game. Once they sort of weathered that storm early on, it was pretty smooth sailing. They just weren't able to get much going. But there were a couple of moments in there where it did look a bit shaky. Gauci made that tremendous double save. But then up the other end, the Saudi goalkeeper had another howler. Christian, what was going on there? He comes out, goes to header the ball away because it's outside the box. Massive clash of heads with Duke, but there's no blood, even though it's literally just head on head, full power. It seemed like a whole lot. And then the commentary were going on about a red card. Now, I don't think it's ever a red card for Dogso there because, there's absolutely no guarantee that Duke's ever going to get to that ball. But it just was a whole bunch of craziness. And, that was originally given a penalty. And again, it's a game with close margins because a millimetre the other way and it is a penalty, and instead it was brought back for a free kick.
Yeah, in the moment, I thought it was a penalty. Like, it was that close. And obviously the replay showed that it was just outside the area. So the right decision was made there. And I believe the keeper got a yellow for that challenge, if I'm not mistaken. I think the broadcast missed it, but I think he did get a yellow card. And yeah, for me, I'm with you, Jacob. That wasn't a red card because you have to see it from an angle where the ball was sort of going near towards the corner flag. And sure, you can't give that as a clear goal scoring opportunity. I think a yellow card is more than fair enough. I guess on both instances, the right decision was made there. Australian fans obviously feel a bit aggrieved. Would have loved to just have that penalty because, like I said, it was just heading for nil the whole game. You could just see it. We just needed that one sort of opportunity. But, you touched on before the fine margins. That double save from Gauci, that was, I believe, offside. So the XG 0.06 that didn't count. So it was just these little small moments. Then obviously the Saudi disallowed goal at the end. So it's just, yeah, so tight in terms of the margins, and the XG doesn't really tell the full picture, to be honest, because if those are onside by a millimeter, then we're talking about a completely different game, and we're criticizing the Socceroos even more. So yeah, in terms of the final third, I think that's where Australia still struggle the most. We haven't found that answer up front, the solution yet. Yangi didn't really get a chance to prove himself. He came on in the 90th minute, but for me, he's probably our most, I guess, dynamic or prolific. I know what Duke offers to the table, his work rate, and even in this game here, his work rate off the ball was exceptional. I thought, just endless running. The pressing was really well, but in the end, it's just that final product and just getting the ball in the back of the net, which is again really struggled. And this is at home, right? Away from
Yeah.
home, we've been struggling even more so, right? That game against Japan, we didn't even have a shot on target. You had to rely on an own goal. So, like I said before at the start, away game against Saudi Arabia, these are the games that you've got to win, and that's why it's a bit disappointing.
Yeah. Well, and you sort of mentioned perhaps a lack of quality up front. And I suppose that, Will, you mentioned decent depth and variability, especially across the back line. But in the 10, that's where we've spoken about it before when Hristich and McGree were injured. Who's going to play there and how is it going to work? Hristich goes off again here in this game, and there's nobody really there that fits the mold. You've got Volupele, Caceres, Yengi, Borrello. None of them are really that out-and-out 10, especially that's needed in this system. What's the answer there? Do you only play with 110? Do you completely change the formation? Or do you have to try and force somebody into playing a perhaps unfamiliar position?
Well, I think what it looks like he'd do, like Popper would do, is just chuck wingers back there, right, with Goody and Iran Kunda like he started in the first game. But that's just not the answer. We've really got a shortage. You said it. There was Caceres came on. He sees himself as a 10. I spoke to Ulfi in a press conference. He said that. I think Ulfi sees him as a 6, right? So that's why that's kind of the role I thought he was selected in his team for was just that central midfield role. I don't, like, he's not necessarily the answer, even though he is good. I don't think he operates in that double kind of inside forward. I don't really see him as that in that half space as much as it is needed in this. He's more of that central 10 who can, press really well from that position and offers things like that. So no, a good player in his own right and really, deserving of a call up. He was one of my favorite players ages ago when he first broke out. I really did love watching him, but happy for him in that case. Just don't really see how he fits in this team as a 10. So you said that Yengi came on late in this one, but it was Borrello, right, who came in. They were kind of rotating a little bit around. It didn't really make a lot of sense, and you could tell that those are the players, or those players kind of prefer playing off the shoulder of the last man. I don't think Yengi or Borrello, as good as they are, I just don't think they're that ball player with the tight touch. It's more about the touch, I think. With those guys specifically, they don't have the ability to play in that corridor. Like, excellent players, further forward. I think even Duke was actually playing all right when he was playing that one touch. Laying it off around the corner and things like that. So he did actually all right. When the game presented chances like that. But yeah, just with this Borrello, Volupele does he have the profile? He's got probably more of a classic winger profile. So I don't know if he's the answer to this. I just think Popper will just, as we said earlier in this as well, like, he'll just keep chucking these players into this role. I think that looks more likely than, a total reinvention adaptation of a different setup that doesn't incorporate both of these 10s. So it's frustrating because, I just don't think we have these players. I mean, one that I was thinking of that maybe could have got a call up this window for this role in the team was maybe Milanovic, who I think was on the tip of some people's tongues about this team and about this squad. I think he'd probably do well in that kind of area. And maybe it's recency bias with his hat trick, but I would have liked to see him maybe get a call up because, just on that bench, I just don't think we had any really straight up replacements, and it's kind of a worrying sign when he's so stubborn to playing in his way, which is has its ups and downs.
Well, I mean, it's perhaps the solution then, instead of trying to play one of these wide players or one of these strikers in that role, do you do like perhaps with Caceres or a Max Ballard, right? He was brought into
Yeah.
the squad, and we know the quality that he has in those tighter spaces and that first touch that he has. And I know, Christian, you're a big fan of his as well. Do you think that he's a potential option to just, if you need him, to be able to fill that role, even though it's not quite what he plays for his club?
Who is this? Sorry, Jacob.
Ballard.
Ballard. Yeah, I think Ballard's an interesting one. He can play in multiple different positions. He's very versatile in that, he can play sort of a box to box midfielder. If you want him in that 10 role, I think he can do a reasonable job there as well. So, if you include a player like that, you've obviously got options up your sleeve. And that's why, I was, very happy that he got the call up, because in the Eredivisie, he's obviously been killing it. And he's just that engine in midfield where, he just makes things happen. And I would have loved to have seen him, play from the outset, but it would have been a stretch too far, I think. Obviously, Caceres making his debut as well. But Ballard is the player who I want to see more of, integrated into this side moving forward. I think he'd complement Irvine quite well, because, on the basis of things, you expect Irvine to be starting, up until the World Cup if we happen to qualify for it. So, I'd love to see Ballard just, slowly just work his way into the side. I think he can offer a lot. Obviously got the quality, a bit of creativity about him as well, and he can shore up the defense in front of it. So, I think there's a lot of positives for him, in this squad. It's just about, if he does play, where does Popovic use him?
Yeah.
You can't waste a talent like that. And, it'll be interesting to see if he does start, the first few games he does start, where does Popovic sort of fit him into the system, and does it suit his characteristics? I think that'll be the big question mark, I think, moving forward.
Well, that's the thing, right? It's that Popovic, in using this double pivot, it's been a very standard double pivot, right? Where one's a deeper six and the other is just sort of this roaming eight. Whereas perhaps maybe when you have a Max Ballard available to you, you can play those two box to box midfielders, because you've got that engine and that work rate in the middle. So it's definitely something to keep an eye on. And Australia now head into a game against Bahrain. We keep saying these are important games. And with arguably, after the dominance they showed in this one, 3 points gone, they only get the one, so it's 2 points gone, really, 2 points dropped. Going to need to look for the win there next Wednesday night, I believe it is. But I tell you what is interesting is, we're talking about this issue at 10 for the Socceroos. There's a club in the A-League that's having a kind of similar problem. It's, of course, the Western Sydney Wanderers with Juan Mata, who famously throughout his career has played in those advanced roles. We were talking a bit about it before the recording as well, how he's played out wide as well during his Premier League career. He's a very dynamic attacking player, but the Wanderers system just seems a little bit out of balance with the sort of player that he is. And it does beg the question, why did they bring him in the first place? And Christian, I know, of course, that you recently put out a piece sort of talking a little bit about this predicament. Do you think that the Wanderers system is set up properly for a player like Juan Mata?
I think at the moment it isn't, but that's not to say that it can't be. And I think that's been the criticism towards Alan Stajic. And we obviously saw the comments on Fahid Benkarfala, which we'll get into a bit later. But, I think a lot of people are slightly a bit disappointed in Stajic for not evolving his system around Mata and trying to make it work for him, for his star player. But at the same time, we know Stajic is obviously under a 1-year contract. He doesn't have much time to prove himself. So, if you're in Stagic's shoes, do you just throw everything, all your plans out the window just to accommodate one player? Or do you think of the greater good of the side and think, okay, if Mata isn't really a part of my plans, or he doesn't suit, which I know is crazy to think, because he is a quality player. Obviously, he's got, an abundance of creativity. The lack of pace, he makes up for it with his IQ and his awareness, his vision, his creativity, all that sort of stuff. But if you don't, plan around him tactically, then it's going to be very difficult for me to see him play a key role, other than, coming off the bench or, a 20, 30-minute cameo. And, we have to remember as well, Mata only had a 10-minute stint when he was at Vissel Kobe in Japan. And I think that was September last year. So, in terms of professional football, he hasn't really played. So, what does that say about the standard of the A-League if he's just slotting straight in without those match minutes under his belt? I think it is feasible to say that he does need a fair bit of time just to grow in terms of, just the fitness levels, acclimatizing to, Australian football. We know it's not easy. under these conditions at times, obviously heading into summer. So yeah, there's all this different stuff to sort of factor in, and it's just the formations as well. So Stage has gone for 4-4-2 last week against the Jets, where Mata sort of accommodated more in the striker role when he came on in the 85th minute. Didn't really have a chance to prove himself, and then he was sort of floated in the striker position the week before against Adelaide, where Stajic played with two number 10s, Milanovic and Krajev. And Krajev was actually one who, before the season, I tipped as, how is he going to fit into the system with Mata? Because we know Krajev could play out wide last season with Wellington, but he's also, I thought, very good when he played more of a central role, where Italiano sort of played him there in that role as well. So I thought, okay, if he's going to sort of play in that position, then where does that leave Mata? Because I certainly don't see Milanovic, having time on the bench, because he's, like improving with the hat-trick against the Jets, he's arguably Wanderer's most important player at the moment, in Barella, if you want to include him in the conversation. So I just think it's about tactically, how do you adjust to fit Mata in? And I guess the next question you'll pose, Jacob, is that a disrespectful element?
Well, yeah, I mean, you mentioned the Fahid Ben Kalfala comments, and of course he was on the A-League Off-Air podcast in their latest episode, talking a bit about the Juan Mata situation, made some comments suggesting perhaps that managers and coaches need to be more aware of the types of players that they're bringing in.
I couldn't believe it, to be honest, before the game when I saw he was on the bench. I couldn't believe when he only came on for 10 minutes or 8 minutes or whatever. I think, to be honest, I think it's disrespectful. I think I hate it. I really, really hate it, because it makes no sense to me. And I'm so sick of those coaches saying, oh yeah, but the intensity. Okay, we will talk about someone who won the World Cup, won the Euro, Champions League, played in England for 10 years. He's always been one of the most intelligent and most technical player of his generation. He wasn't quick. He wasn't the strongest. So despite that, he was one of the best players in the world. And we're talking about A-League intensity. You must be kidding. Put horses on the pitch. They will be running, but they can't kick a ball and they can't play. They can't pass the ball. And I'm seriously, I'm disgusted to hear that kind of stuff. And every time those excuses. Put a system, play with Juan Mata as a 10 with two wingers or whatever, 2 6s, and he will be the best player in the league.
So yeah, I'm going to throw to you now, Will. It does beg the question, does more thought need to go into these transfers from, the coach's perspective, but from the clubs as well? Because while Juan Mata undoubtedly has been a huge marketing get for the club, yeah, he's not had that impact on the pitch. And it's because, Stajic, we know he likes a 4-4-2. It just seems antithetical to bring in a player who isn't going to fit that in the first place. So do you think that there needs to be more consideration about getting these players in? Or is it something that, hey, look, we've got this player in, now we need to make those adjustments?
Okay, look, that last point you made, I think I lean more to this when we're talking about a player of Juan Mata's, magnitude, right?
Yeah.
I think that allows for you to go, maybe it throws a lot of the squad planning out the window, and it certainly appears as if Stag has not planned for this, or been a part of this even. He's kind of just had Juan Mata show up at his doorstep, and now he's gone, okay, now what do I do? We're a bit thin up top. I'll just chuck him there for now while I kind of think of a way. But no, as you said, like, I think Juan Mata is such a big name that even though the plan and the cohesion between the coach and management, and then administrators of the club who obviously brought him in, was so misaligned. I think that Mata is such a big player and a big get who could absolutely still do a job in the A-League, right? I think he's the player that you go, okay, now I can adapt my football a little bit. I don't think Stag has that big of a personal brand with his football and an obvious philosophy. Obviously, he favours the 4-4-2, but he's played about 4 formations already across Australia Cup while he was working things out. Like, we've seen him need to still plan things with his squad and see what works, right? We've seen him be adaptable in the preseason, and I think that was something that I saw going into the season as a potential benefit to this side, is kind of the flexibility in the lineup and kind of how you can adapt to opposition and play all these different setups. I thought that's what Stash was going for, but obviously he was just trying to get things right. But I don't see why he's given up on that even after Mata's arrived. So it seems a bit bizarre to me. Although I do concede the point that there does need to be at least cohesion between, we see this right in Europe when there's no director of football, and the club's kind of signing players that the manager doesn't really want, and there's no identity, not to fit the structure, things like that. That's kind of obviously what's happened, right? But as I said at the start, I think, Mata is the player that you do switch things up for. I don't think it's hard to get this team lined up with a single number 10 in it, where he can be his most effective. Like, we know where he is most effective. It's not like, how do I use this player? He's really good at certain things. I don't really know where to put him. Like, we know what he does, right? He's got 15 years of top flight, excellence in Europe. We know what he's capable of, and how he needs to receive the ball, and exactly what he needs to do. And he'll be telling Stadge in training, like, this is where I want it, and receive it here, and play me just as the front prong of this triangle, or whatever you need to do to get it working. But it seems like it shouldn't be this hard to get a number 10 in the system. And I think it's stubbornness. Is Stadge sending a message? By not, is he saying that he is in charge of selecting the lineup, basically, and that the club hierarchy aren't? That's what it appears to be, because it just seems like it should be a bit easier to put him in this squad and actually use him to maximum efficiency, because we haven't seen it. And I think the league, has benefited in the early days before the signing, before we saw what happens on the pitch with him so far. And he's got his own sponsor that came on board to the club, after just as the season was starting. So he's given that commercial side back to the club already. Like, maybe the hierarchy are happy enough with that, but I don't know. It just seems like a bit of an odd situation where you just should be able to fit a 10 in this team, and I don't know why it hasn't worked so far.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is that you're right. It does seem like it would be an easy way of just moving a couple of moving pieces, and you can fit him in. Playing a 4-3-3, you can even keep the double pivot. If you play sort of a 4-2-3-1, you can keep a focus on that wing play where you can get Milanovic involved. It does seem like there are options there. And you mentioned the sort of variations that he tried in preseason, and I agree with you that I thought the Wanderers were going to have a decent season. Christian, obviously, you predicted that they're going to win the whole thing.
Don't bring it up again.
Don't bring it up again. But everybody sort of came into this season expecting them to be one of the top performers, and up until recently, off the back of Milanovic's performance there, they haven't really hit their strides. So it is a strange situation for sure. And with Stajic only on a 1-year deal as well, that just throws another thing into it, because if he's taking such a firm stance on this, that's a huge statement for him to be making, because he's saying he fully backs himself here without any job security. So, it's definitely a strange situation, and it'll be interesting to see how that one plays out. But we're going to sort of kind of stay in Western Sydney in a way, here as we transition into some Women's Asian Cup stuff, because of course the stadiums for that tournament have been announced, one of them being Parramatta, the others of course Homebush, Gold Coast, HBF and Optus. Now, there was a lot of sort of questioning about, in this release, would we know who's going to get which matches, who's going to get the final, etc., etc. That's not been announced yet, so there's still a little bit of speculation. So I'm going to go to you here, Christian. First of all, who do you think will get the final? Which stadium? But which one do you actually want to have the final?
I think Parramatta will probably get the final in Sydney. Sydney always get the final, right, for these big tournaments. So I just can't look past any other city than Sydney getting it, to be honest. I can't see being playing in Perth the final. I could not see that.
Even though Optus is bigger.
Though Optus is big, I mean,
Combank's only 30k. Like, it's
it's a tough one. I mean, Gold Coast, I don't see either. But yeah, Optus is a good shout. I mean, simply because of the 60k and the capacity they obviously want to fill as much as possible. But I feel as though it will come to the highest bidder in terms of government. And that's why they haven't announced a decision yet. I think it will come to that. And it may well be Perth, who knows, if they can, I guess, offer a high bid. But yeah, Perth, I guess, would make sense as well, just to, I guess, bring out the best crowd possible. You want to make the product, as appealing as possible, right? We saw what happened at the World Cup last year. I think obviously there's going to be way more demand this time around, because everyone knows what to expect. The hype around the Matildas, and it's just grown leaps and bounds until that point. So I think these types of decisions do have to be taken, a bit seriously, obviously. And yeah, I think either Optus or Parramatta, if any of those two stadiums get picked up, I wouldn't be surprised.
Well, I mean, you mentioned that there's sort of this vibe and people love the Matildas, etc., etc. But that's exactly the problem, right? Is they love the Matildas. Is if they don't make the final, are people going to show up for it? And so I honestly look, they have to announce which stadium is going to have the final. But if they do want to, like you said, Christian, keep it in Sydney, what's to say they don't go? Oh yeah, it's going to be at Homebush, right? 80,000 people. Huge, and if the Matildas get there, then that's perfectly fine. But the Matildas fall in the quarters or the semis,
I completely miss Homebush. Sorry, 80k.
Yeah.
That's a core, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I'd say a core. Sorry, but
yeah,
not Parramatta. That was my mistake.
But then, I mean, is there that option for them if the Matildas don't make it to go? Change in scheduling. We have to go to Parramatta now.
Parramatta,
so it doesn't look as bad. Will, what are your thoughts on the stadiums?
Yeah, I think Parramatta's a great venue, and as you said, that would be perfect if it was a non-Matildas team, right? But we've already seen. I was there at the game, the Matildas game, Monday night friendly against China, that they absolutely packed out, and it was. Homebush, it's not a great stadium to get to. It's middle of nowhere. Public transport sucks. You always get trapped afterwards. It's a nightmare to get the bus or get to the train station.
The train is awful.
It works, and I don't know. I feel like they set it up really nicely, and have the proper kind of, facilities when it's a big concert or anything like that. Like you saw, there's a time lapse of like people leaving Taylor Swift or something from there, and it's all organized, but it just doesn't seem like it has that same smoothness after a football match. When I've been there, it's such a nightmare. And actually, I have a little cheeky parking tip there. I just park in there's a business's back kind of parking lot, and kind of off the curb a bit, it just tucked away. But last time I was there, they actually blocked off that whole driveway. It was behind a mechanic. They blocked it. I had to park on the actual street parking and just hope I didn't get a fine. But it is just a nightmare. You walk from Centennial, I think. I don't know. It's those kind of logistics. But I was going to say the fact that, you still got 80K basically, or 70 something. I can't remember exactly the number, but it was, high 70s to that Monday night friendly. It was freezing. I think that just shows that, that's the venue in Sydney, right? The fans are still there. I don't think the Tillies hype has died off. Everyone still loves the team, and that will go deep into selling out if they do make the final. But it's just such a gamble at this stage.
That's the question, though. Like you said, if the Matildas do make the final, like if it's Japan v I don't know, South Korea, for example, if that's a possibility, will you get that same number? I don't think so. You might even get half. We just don't really know. But at the same time, I guess you've got to take that risk, right? Because if the Matildas do make the final, and you're playing in a stadium that's, not 60 or 80,000 like an Optus or Homebush, then you look quite a bit silly and there's the opportunity lost. So you've got to weigh up so much, and it is difficult in advance because you can't obviously change the decision. If the Matildas lose in the semis, okay, we're going to change the location of the final. Unfortunately, you can't do that. So that's where they've got to sort of weigh it up a bit.
One thing that could work in their favor, I guess, is if they push the ticket hype for the final enough and kind of just sell it as much as they can early on, people will buy the tickets up anyway, just in case, right? Well, if they announce it, it's Homebush. Oh, you're going to miss out. They can ramp up ticket sales enough so people do commit either way, right? And they've got that baseline of maybe it's 50,000, maybe it's 55, 60, whatever they get to in that pre-sale, where it's not a commercial loss if they have it there and they only get 30,000, right? You have to have, I've heard a number thrown around where you have to kind of at least half fill a stadium for it not to just completely be losing money.
Yeah.
And it's probably different at an 80K, right? The numbers and the scale is probably a bit different. But yeah, if they push that hard enough, I think that you can hype up the Sydney crowd and the fans to push it to nearly, not a sellout, but get those sales in early and kind of lock in that.
And that's what they did for the
number.
World Cup as well, which is why you saw that sell. And the World Cup, we know, obviously is completely different to the Asian Cup. That's just such a major, sporting event, women's as well. So I think that's what they did as well with the pre-sales, just trying to, bump up those ticket sales early, just in case the Matildas didn't make the final. But either way, World Cup final, I know it's completely different to an Asian Cup final. It's still, Asian Cup's still a big tournament, don't get me wrong, but I think that was also a factor as well. So pre-sales, like Will said, will definitely be a big factor.
I think that's the thing, right? Is you've got to try and push that FOMO if you don't want to miss the chance of seeing the Tillies win on home soil, and it's going to be a massive selling point. So it'll be interesting to find out which one they select. I do tend to lean towards it being Sydney and being Homebush just because it's the biggest venue. But Christian, you did raise an interesting point when you said it could come down to the governments and whoever pushes the hardest for it. But with all this chat about the Socceroos and the Matildas, they're not the only Australian national teams out there playing at the moment. And Paletti, thank you for the reminder prior to the recording and putting a bit in the rundown about this. The Pararoos and the Paramatildas are also in competition as well. There's been plenty of content that we've been doing over on the Roundball Australia website. When I say we, it's been Paletti. But they've been hard at work writing up a bunch of interviews that they've done. They went to the team's media days, spoke to the players. Fantastic content there. And it's just go and have a read of it, because these are two teams that, they get overlooked, right? People either haven't heard of them or don't really care much about them, but they're still footballers that are representing this country, and we love that. Just a quick update on some of the games that have been played. The Pararoos had their opening game. They fell 5-0 to the USA in the IFCPF World Cup, which is being hosted in Spain. Not a fantastic result for them, a bit deflating perhaps. And by the time that you listen to this on the Friday morning, the Pararoos will also have played their second game against Thailand, and that one was rescheduled. Obviously, we're not fortune tellers, so we don't know what the result there is going to be. If we were fortune tellers, we'd all be a lot richer, I'm sure. we wouldn't be doing this podcast. We'd be off to bigger and grander things, I'm sure, or we'd be doing a podcast from a beach villa in Bali or something. I don't know.
In Bahamas.
Yeah, in the Bahamas.
I'd be in one of those units that overlook a football field. That's
yeah. Classic. The Paramatildas, on the other hand, they will have opened their campaign against Japan. Hopefully both teams get a win there. The Pararoos able to turn around that 5-0 loss, and the Paramatildas go on and get a strong start to the competition. But keep an eye out on them, and keep an eye out on the Roundball Australia website for the content that we're going to put up about them, because it's really important that we, of course, cover as much football as we can, but that we're covering these teams that are representing this country.
Hello, everybody. Lockie coming in here. I bet you didn't think you were going to hear from me this episode, but I've snuck in right at the end because, as Jacob says, I was at the Socceroos game tonight, but it is approximately 1 a.m. at the moment. I'm stitching this episode together, and I realised I didn't tell the boys to announce the winner of our Unite Round ticket giveaway. So a quick little interjection to do just that. Of course, we were asking people what their favourite personal A-League memory was. We had another couple of great entries come through after the last episode. One was Harry. He talked about the Riley McGree scorpion kick in that game against Melbourne City. Probably the best goal that the league has ever seen. Absolutely amazing. But that will have to settle for honourable mention status, because the winner of our 2 free tickets courtesy of the APL to the Saturday session at Allianz Stadium of Unite Round goes to Napoleon, and he wrote in and talked about the 99th minute Nick's equaliser against the Melbourne Victory in the semi-finals last year. What an incredible moment that was. He talks about the fact that it was his first year watching the A-League, and he's not even a Wellington fan, and just the crowd reaction for that goal was enormous. So congratulations, Napoleon. We'll be reaching out to you in the next couple of days to give you your free tickets. But thank you to everyone who entered, and thank you to the APL again for reaching out and giving us this opportunity. But of course, if you are at Unite Round next week, we're going to be there as well. Most of our crew are going to be in and around the fan zone at the games as well. So if you see us, do come up and say hi. We'd love to meet you. But back to the main show.
And that will do for this episode of the Roundball Australia podcast. Obviously, a bit different. I was hosting. We had Will and Christian, easily the two best guests we've ever had. We got some nice parking tips there from Will. So, listeners, if you guys have any fantastic little tips or tricks about game day, let us know. Right? Hit us up on social media with it. It'd be fantastic to hear this, because I know myself, I have a bunch of little hidden secrets or things that I do differently about game day that other fans don't do. And I don't know, maybe it gives me a leg up. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe it takes longer to walk to the ground, but parking's easier, something like that. Let us know what they are, because that's what makes football so fantastic. But I mentioned you both. Will, thank you for coming on, mate. It was a pleasure to have a chat with you.
Yes, good. Much more enjoyable than that Socceroos game. Yes.
And Christian, wearing the Australia kit today. Surprised you haven't set it on fire with how reactionary you can be.
Yeah, that's true. If the Saudi Arabia goal stood at the end, I definitely would have been burnt for sure. I would have opted for an England shirt. No, jokes.
Wow.
Never stooped that low.
Yeah.
Well, Jacob, great effort tonight hosting the pod. I think you are definitely much better than Lockie, so we're going to have a bit of a discussion there as to maybe kick Lockie out and maybe make Jacob. What do you think, Will?
Who's editing this? I need to know who's editing.
Lockie is editing.
Okay, Lockie. Well then I think it's an even 50-50 split between the two.
I will say, I don't mind not having the responsibility of hosting. I'm happy to relinquish that to Lockie, but it's always fun to step in when needed. But as I said, that will do us for today. We'll be back on, what will this one be? A Friday, so we'll be back on Tuesday as regularly scheduled. Of course, no A-League content to cover because it is the international break. What are we going to do? I don't know, but there's always something going on in Australian football that's there to cover, and we'll be there.
Ridiculous news story that will come out.
That's right. So, yeah, stick around because we'll be back again on Tuesday. Thank you very much for listening. Goodbye.